Hi, I'm Mary Buhay, Senior Vice President of Marketing for G&S Business Communications. And it is my pleasure to welcome Betsy West to the Global Street Fight. Welcome, Betsy.
Thank you, Mary. So happy to be here.
Oh, so wonderful to have you here. And Betsy West, of course, along with her co-director, co-producer, Julie Cohen, are the magnificent team behind RBG. The Oscar-nominated documentary about the life and work of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So before we get started, we have a few highlights we'd like to take a look at.
I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks.
We welcome today Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
She's become such an icon.
Do you mind signing this copy?
I am 84 years old and everyone wants to take a picture with me.
Notorious RBG. Yeah.
When you come right down to it, the closest thing to a superhero I know. Ruth Bader Ginsburg changed the way the world is for American women.
I became a lawyer when women were not wanted by the legal profession.
Thousands of state and federal laws discriminated on the basis of gender. She was following in the footsteps of the battle for racial equality. She wanted equal protection for women.
Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law.
She captured for the male members of the court what it was like to be a second-class citizen.
The point is that the discriminatory line almost inevitably hurts women.
I did see myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher in those days because the judges didn't think sex discrimination existed.
I have had the great good fortune to share life with a partner truly extraordinary for his generation.
He was the first boy I ever knew who cared that I had a brain.
She is a center of power on and off the court.
Every time Justice Ginsburg wrote a dissent, the internet would explode.
I came up with a couple slogans. You can't spell truth without Ruth.
I surely would not be in this room today without the determined efforts of men and women who kept dreams alive.
I've heard that she does 20 push-ups 3 times a week or something. I mean, we can't even get off the floor. We can't even get down to the floor.
Can we give that one? So much fun. So much fun. I was telling Betsy, this was mandatory viewing at my house. During the holidays, I'm the mom to two teenage sons. Made sure that this was happening. So congratulations.
Thank
the
you.
Accolades keep pouring in.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so next week, apparently, this film is up for more awards.
Yes.
Everybody see this? So you're heading off to the MTV Movie and TV Awards.
Yes. RBG has been nominated as for Best Documentary, but also as Best Real Life Hero. And then I really love this for Best Fight. So she's up against, it's RBG versus, let's see, gender inequity, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And up against all the Avengers and the other Marvel superheroes.
I could not have planned this better. Global Street Fight, Best Fight.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Perfect.
She's tough.
We love this. And, you know, obviously the question is, why do you think this story resonates across generations?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of incredible. Julie and I didn't actually think, you know, that we were making a film that would appeal to 9-year-old girls. Mm-hmm. But in fact, you know, young girls turned out to be a big part of our audience along, you know, across the generations, millennials and, you know, older women who actually really understand what she was up against. So it cuts through. And I mean, there's something very authentic about Justice Ginsburg, and obviously her story is supremely inspiring. And I think there's also just that twist of here is this teeny little grandmother, cancer survivor who is, speaking truth to power. And there's just something wonderfully appealing about that image.
And speaking to the concept of storytelling, it is an irresistible story, isn't it? It's a love story that's wrapped up in your classic, but very badass hero's journey. Wouldn't you say? So clearly in a hero's journey, the hero goes off, call to adventure, meets up with a guardian who helps her find her inner strength. And who's that guardian? Martin Ginsburg. Clearly. So she doesn't seem like the mushy type. What was she like talking about this?
Well, in terms of the Marty narrative, I mean, obviously, this is a film about constitutional law, what Justice Ginsburg did to change the laws in America. But also, it is kind of a rom-com a little bit with the Marty character. And, I had interviewed Justice Ginsburg once before this for a series I did about the modern women's movement called Makers. And it was 2011, the year after Marty died. And, when you interview a Supreme Court justice, it's obviously intimidating, and there are all kinds of rules, and you're in the court in this sort of big, august room, and there are, many PR people kind of standing, watching you, and giving you time cues, and, the whole thing. And so I can't remember how much time I had with her, maybe 45 minutes, something like that. I waited until the end to ask the questions about, went through her history, at that point, as a women's rights advocate and her feelings about the Supreme Court. And I waited until the end to ask about Marty. And, they were already giving me the time cue. And I said, just tell me about Marty. And I was a little worried that maybe she would be emotional or, sad to talk about him because he had died, within the year. And her face just lit up. It was unbelievable. And she just talked. She just, for somebody who's not sometimes that garrulous, I mean, she just talked and was so happy to kind of bring back his memory by talking about him. So we knew that there was a real, genuine love story there. And
you tapped into that reservoir of emotion, right?
Absolutely. Exactly. Yeah, in a happy way. You know, she's happy to talk about Marty.
Well, that's wonderful. I mean, there were so many parts of this movie. We just wondered how you got access to certain, parts of the story. But take us back to the beginning, because we are in a room filled with people who love to pitch ideas.
Yeah.
What was that pitch to Justice Ginsburg like?
Well, as I said, I had interviewed her for this series, the Makers series, and so I'd had some experience with her, but hadn't been in touch at all since that. Julie had also interviewed her for a documentary she did about Russ and Daughters, the Lower East Side fish store that Ruth Bader, as a little girl, used to go to. So she'd also had some experience with her. So we wrote an email to her assistant, and it was I tell my students, I teach at Columbia Journalism School, this email was, parsed and edited and re-edited. I mean, it did not get sent the afternoon we wrote it, because, you're really careful. We didn't make it too long. It was just kind of to the point that we wanted to tell her life story, and including her history as a women's rights advocate. At that time, she had started to blow up on the internet in 2015 as the author of some very stinging and resonant dissents to the court as it was moving to the right. So she had this, as you would say, a fan base of progressives and millennials, younger people who were really interested in Notorious RBG. And our feeling at that point was that these people don't know the full story. They didn't know the romance, and many of them didn't really know her history as a women's rights advocate in the 70s. So anyway, we just pitched this to her, wanted to do her full story, and her background, as a litigator and as a justice. And we got an answer very quickly, basically saying, not yet. I'm not ready yet to do this. And that was a little discouraging. I mean, she was 82 years old at that time. I'm thinking, okay, not now. When?
Wait, so she is immortal? is what she's saying. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was discouraging, but then, you know, my partner Julie is unbelievably optimistic person. She always, I mean, I'm pretty optimistic, but Julie is amazing. And her immediate reaction was, okay, you know, she's opening the door. She didn't say no. She just said not yet. So then, you know, we waited a few months and we did more research and we made a list of everyone we were thinking of interviewing because we thought we would demonstrate, okay, we're serious journalists here. This is not going to be some fluffy thing that we've gone back and we've looked at the people, you know, a list of maybe 15 people. And we sent her the email. Again, quick response. Her first sentence was, I would not be prepared to give you an interview for at least 2 years. Like, okay, next paragraph. However, if you are going to be interviewing people, you might want to consider, and then she listed 3 other people who were not on our list. So we thought, okay, now she really is saying it's okay for you to go ahead. So that was her opening the door. Then, of course, we realized we needed the money to make the film. And, you know, this was not something that could be shot on our iPhones or something. I mean, we had to raise serious money, and we weren't going to be doing a Kickstarter campaign or do it dribs and drabs. I mean, we really needed somebody who had the wherewithal to do it. We went to 3 different places, I will not name their names, who turned us down. And when we talked almost a year after Justice Ginsburg said, yeah, you know, you can go ahead, we went to CNN Films. They have a very kind of select group of films that they do every year, usually 5 or so, that they either acquire or produce and then release theatrically, then later they go on CNN. So they got it immediately. Maybe it helped. They were all women running the CNN Films, but they responded right away. And also, you know, Jeff Zucker, who runs it, thought that it had potential. I mean, they were eager that we get the kind of access that we ultimately did get to her personal life, you know, and to the gym. Which I can tell you about filming that, which was pretty amazing. I mean, that they wanted that, and it was clear that was something we wanted, but we also felt strategically that's not something we're going to write to Justice Ginsburg right now and say, hey, you know, can we be with your family and can we go to the gym? I mean, we had to kind of, you know, worm our way in there, you know. So the next step was we got a development deal with CNN. We did some interviews. They liked the interviews. And in that time, the Justice's office, kind of out of the blue, shared with us a list of all the places that she was going to be speaking that upcoming year, because she does, you know, speak at law firms or, you know, legal conferences and to academic groups. And, you know, she was going to the Virginia Military Institute on the 20th anniversary of that decision that she had authored. So once she did that, that was, then we could go to those events, which were sort of, some of them were somewhat private or quasi-private. We might be the only camera there. You know, we're shooting in a conference or something. It's not like up close and personal. We would be in the back and then, you know, we sort of wave, hi, Justice Ginsburg, here we are. You know, sometimes we'd come up and briefly say hi to her, but it really was it was a year after we started filming that we asked to meet with her in her chambers. And we sort of brought her up to date on who we'd interviewed, how it was going. I mean, we didn't get her permission to, you know, we were doing it on our own, but we just sort of filled her in. And then we said, but we'd really have some other shooting we'd really like to do. And I was very nervous. I you know, I could barely get the words out, you know, that we wanted to film her in her office working and at home working and scenes with her family. And then, you know, at the end I said, and would it be possible for us to film you working out in the gym? I mean, really, I was just like a little mouse the way I asked her. I thought I could barely breathe. And she paused. She's a very deliberate person. She paused for a second and then she said, yes, I think that would be possible. You know, we were just like, Julie and I didn't even look at each other, because we would have just gone, so that's how that happened. And we didn't tell, the other thing was, she is a Supreme Court justice. She's very busy. Her schedule is very controlled. She has a wonderful assistant who really manages her life. And then there are other people in the court, the PR people, who also have their rules. We left. We didn't actually tell her assistant, oh, Justice Ginsburg said we can go into the gym with her. We just thought, we'll save that for an email. We'll tell her that, next week.
Wonderful lessons for all of us, right? You don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, but you have to ask and pick your time.
That's right.
I think if we had asked right up front, here, we want to do a story about your life, and we got to do this and this. Some people, at the beginning, you kind of tell them, you lay out what it's going to involve. But with somebody in her position, that seemed not a good idea.
Well played.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's interesting is before RBG, there had never been a film about a sitting Supreme Court justice.
Yeah.
What were some of the other constraints around that?
Well, there are a lot of constraints of filming in the Supreme Court, which, you may know, but they have a whole PR apparatus. You can't film, obviously, the proceedings. But, there's an incredible resource, this Oye.com, which the Supreme Court has been keeping records of all its the arguments since the 60s. And you can go in there and listen to everything. It's amazing. It takes you 30 seconds to go online. And so you hear the young Ruth Bader Ginsburg arguing these cases. We found it so inspiring. We very much wanted to film in the chambers, and that took some doing. We put in the request, and it took months and months, but they did allow us to go in with a Steadicam, and I think that's the first time. It's not the first time anyone's filmed in the empty chambers, but I think it was the first time anyone had filmed with a Steadicam. We had half an hour to the second. We couldn't film in certain areas, we wanted to get a shot from the perspective of the justices. They would not let us go up on there. We had to stay behind a certain line. It's a very controlled environment. We were filming Justice Ginsburg meeting with a group of students, high school students from St. Louis, kind of an interfaith group, after which she gave a little talk, and the students were they were asking questions, and they were very excited, and then she left. And so we went over to one of the students who had asked a question to say, what was that like? Or just, ask like you would in news coverage. And the PR people came over and said, oh, no. We have a rule. No one but a justice can be interviewed inside the Supreme Court. Okay, we didn't know that rule. So it's a controlled environment. But, we had her approval. And so certainly that paved the way.
Well, we see how you use some of the material from the archives wonderfully in the movie.
Yeah.
And I just kind of wanted to go back to, in the trailer, you see there's a scene of the confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
Which is, here's a fun fact. So as they're panning Senators Orrin Hatch and Joseph Biden, guess who's in the gallery, right? Anybody remember? Future Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan.
Yeah,
right?
she was on the committee. She was on the Senate Judiciary
Awesome.
Committee. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's very cool.
Yeah, you think back, so that happened 26 years ago. Well, first of all, she was nominated 26 years ago this week, June 14th.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, cool, right?
Wow, yeah.
And as we all know, she was confirmed later that summer, and by a vote of 96-3.
Yeah, I know.
Let's remember that. And what I love about this is that same 26 years, that same generation has grown up, has rediscovered Ruth Bader Ginsburg, turned her into Notorious, RBG obviously, but has now rediscovered her work from the 1970s.
Yeah.
And so let's remember what it was like to be Ruth Bader Ginsburg arguing for gender equality. We've got a little clip from those archives.
Female citizens of Louisiana are denied equal protection by the total absence of their peers from the jury.
I thought the new theory was that there's very little difference between men and women, and so why wouldn't a men's jury be their
Well,
peers?
I'm not aware of that new theory.
They didn't get it. They didn't understand the issues that women were facing, or they didn't see them as issues. Because women had, in their minds, women had a place, and it wasn't where Ruth Ginsburg was suggesting that it ought to be.
Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law.
You won't settle for putting Susan B. Anthony on the new dollar.
When they would say things like this, how did you respond?
Well, never in anger, as my mother told me. That would have been self-defeating. Always as an opportunity to teach. I did see myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher in those days, because the judges didn't think sex discrimination existed. Well, one of the things I tried to plant in their minds was, think about how you would like the world to be for your daughters and granddaughters.
The gender line helps to keep women not on a pedestal, but in a cage.
One of the things that I'm struck by as I look back on it is how unprepared the defendants were to fight back. We won because the strategy was brilliant. We won because we were smart and prepared, and we fought hard.
You couldn't miss what Ruth was doing during the 70s.
She was creating a legal landscape.
Well, that was a fun time travel.
Yeah.
I think we need to crank up the AC because I feel the temperature rising in this room. I see some steam coming out of people's ears.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing to remember what it was like, you know, and listening to those tapes and just the attitudes and the kind of dismissiveness and those kind of like, wow.
Yeah, in the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah,
exactly.
and she kept her cool, very strategic, very careful. Yeah.
Well, it's astounding. Women's rights remain a battleground today, right? 2019 is going to be a watershed year in terms of legislation around women's reproductive rights.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, as you take this film across the country, and perhaps, I'm not sure if you've had talks with groups outside of the U.S., what is that sentiment like when they talk about this film in relation to the political environment?
Yeah. Well, you know, we started the film, as I said, in 2015. That was before, you know, Donald Trump was even a candidate for president. That was before Me Too, before Time's Up. I mean, it was a very different landscape. This film, you know, opened in 2017, and the response to it, I think, was definitely affected by the change in our political landscape. She's become, obviously, a very important figure for many people in our country. Her role on the Supreme Court is, and with 2 more, you know, vacancies having been filled by more conservative justices, she's certainly somebody people are very interested in. And I think in general, the kind of reawakening of the women's movement in this country and you know, internationally has also affected the reception. I mean, the film has opened. It is around the world. And I was in Brazil, of all places, you know, and they also have a very difficult political situation with a new leader who is, you know, many people have called misogynist and has said some amazing things about women. And you know, the young girls were coming up to me afterward just saying, oh, she's our hero. You know, we need women like this on the judiciary. So there is a way in which her story, even though people may not understand the, you know, U.S. judicial system, they identify with the battle that she fought. I mean, but it's, you know, it's strange times. At the same time, here we are fighting on reproductive rights. Something that, you know, Justice Ginsburg has been very firmly in favor of and was from the time she was, you know, on her confirmation hearings, spoke out in favor of reproductive rights and, you know, was confirmed, as you said, 96-3 by conservative senators who said, look, I may not agree with her on everything, but I think she's well qualified and yes, I'm voting for her. it just seems like a long time ago that we had that sort of, what's the word? I don't know. Equanimity. I don't know what the word is. Just it seems like a long time ago. Civility. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think this would be a great time to just take some questions from the audience. We'll have more time later, certainly toward the end. But anybody have questions about the making of this documentary or your experiences with Justice Ginsburg? Got a question right here.
I'm just curious, what's next for you?
Well, I think both Julie and I feel that, we're very heartened by the response to the film. It's just been very exciting. And it's also, I think, opened our eyes to a number of other stories of women whose perhaps histories aren't as well known as they should be. I mean, in some ways, it's kind of easy picking because, there's just a lot of unrecognized heroes out there. And, both of us like to do stories that matter, but also, we can have some fun with and also, inspire people with. So we have a couple of things in development. I'm not quite ready to talk about them, but about women.
Yep.
Yeah.
Any more questions about the documentary itself or Justice Ginsburg? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just wondering what the dynamic with her granddaughter. Can you
Yeah.
talk more about what that was like?
Yeah. Justice Ginsburg, when we went to see her in that meeting in March and sort of filled her in on what we've been doing, she said, well, have you talked to Clara yet? And we had been planning to talk to Clara, but hadn't reached out to her then. And so it was clear she really wanted us to talk. She's very proud of her. And actually, so we interviewed Clara. When she was still at Harvard. She graduated that May. And then we filmed the scene of her with her bubby in the, making coffee, which was, so natural. Clara's very, I think she's got the Marty gene. She's just very poised and at ease, and so that was kind of cool. But Clara came to a screening a couple of months ago, and I asked her something about, when did she first hear about the documentary? She said, oh, my grandmother called me, and she said, 2 women are making a documentary about me, and you will give them an interview. So I was like, okay.
Question?
Yeah, I have one question. Just, do you have an example of a time where you struggled with the balance of that journalistic storytelling with the need to also entertain and engage the audience?
Yeah, both Julie and I are journalists. I teach at Columbia Journalism School. I consider myself a journalist. But clearly this is a film that has some fun and, celebrates parts of Justice Ginsburg's career, which I think everybody recognizes on pretty much all, sides of the aisle, that she was a groundbreaker in the 70s. I mean, there's not a lot of debate about that. And, we really, as in a documentary film where you're putting up the scenes on the wall, and we had our scenes, and we were balancing the lighter-hearted scenes with the serious story of constitutional law, how she changed the world. And sometimes our solution became, after we'd go through a section, we'd go, okay, we need some Marty now. Let's get some Marty in here. Because, there's a kind of a flow, and you need a little bit of a break and relief. So and our editor, Carla Gutierrez, who was just supremely talented, was the person who figured out that we could use the Senate confirmation hearings as a kind of narrative structure. So if you look at the film, you'll see after the opening and everything, the first scene after the opening is her testifying and starting to tell her story. And then we go back in history and you know, her childhood and everything else. And then we come back to the Senate confirmation hearings, and then we could go forward in time. I mean, it gave us a narrative structure that I think was really helpful. You know, it's like, you know, like he said, it's like knitting a sweater. I mean, it's like making a mosaic or something, doing a documentary. It's really, to me, the most fun part, you know, being in the edit room and trying to kind of stitch it all together.
It came together beautifully, yes.
Yeah.
So I grew up knowing her as Kiki Bader because she
Yes.
went to my sleepaway camp.
She went to your camp?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
No, I was a little.
Yeah, you were a little, not at the, yes.
So she's just such a hero.
But she was a figure at your camp?
A huge figure.
Yeah.
In the other movie, they do talk about it briefly, but so she's amazing. I hate to ask this, but I'm curious about the backlash. Have you got any? Did you anticipate it? Anything surprising or shocking?
I anticipated that we would get some backlash, but to us, no, not really. You know, the internet, after the film was released and then she got sick last fall, first, you know, breaking her ribs and then the discovery of another cancer, and then she had a surgery. In January and February, I was aware of the fact that there was a big, you know, she's dead, they're hiding it from us, you know, she's not alive. I mean, there was a whole, where is Ruth Bader Ginsburg, hashtag. You know, even after she went back to the Supreme Court, which would mean that every single one of the Supreme Court justices, including, you know, Clarence Thomas and Alito, would have to be in on this conspiracy to be hiding Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So, you know, it made no sense. So there is that goes on the fake news world, on the real fake news world. But there wasn't a lot toward us. I mean, I was surprised also in screenings, people would come up and say, you know, I'm a lifelong Republican, but wow, I admire her, she's amazing. You know, there's something about her that I do think crosses over some of the political lines, and she herself has been so devoted to civil discourse and to being friends with all of her her colleagues, Scalia, everybody, despite their ideological differences. I mean, she truly believes in that, and I think you can feel that.
There's some amazing remarks from Senator Hatch.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know,
movie.
we had a hard time getting Senator Hatch to do the interview. We really had to hound his office because he had been very critical to her getting such overwhelming support in the Senate. So I wondered when we went there, was he going to backpedal a little bit, and you know, was he going to criticize her? I mean, she had criticized candidate Trump the summer before, and then had walked those comments back, which, you know, something that we felt we had to cover in the film. I mean, that's a part of our journalistic responsibility, was when it came to, you know, she's not a perfect person, and we had to present that. Anyway, we go to interview Senator Hatch, and I was kind of pushing him to criticize her for those comments or for anything else, and if he just, you know, first he said, look, she made a mistake, people make mistakes, and what's the big deal, she's incredible. And then at the end, he just looked at me and he said, I love Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean, almost like, hey, you know, you're married, she's not. But I was like, it was so intense. It was like, you know, it was pretty incredible. And then a month later, he announced that he wasn't running for re-election. So that's probably why he felt free to be so, you know, effusive about her.
Super. I know we will have more questions, but let's turn the discussion back now to sort of this documentary filmmaking that you do so wonderfully. We have some insights. We have a public opinion poll here that we took. We have a wonderful insights team you've heard about earlier.
Yeah.
And we asked people in the past 12 months, how many of you watched documentaries?
Isn't that incredible?
It is. Look, more than half.
That's
on their
amazing.
Own.
I know.
And I love that second data point, which is more than a third watch it together with other people.
Yeah.
It just shows you the power of documentaries to bring people together. right?
Remember when it used to be the D word? You know, literally, you didn't say documentary. It sort of implied it was a serious report.
Yep.
You know, it was going to be boring. But I think that, you know, documentaries have evolved from the time of Hoop Dreams, you know, in the late 80s, which really proved that a documentary could employ you know, narrative storytelling techniques and could be as engaging and as compelling and still, you know, true, still journalistic true as a narrative film. And I think this past couple of years, with the explosion of online services and the we have a lot of people say, oh yeah, I just go and look and see, and I just find documentaries on Netflix or Amazon or wherever. It's amazing.
Oh, a lot of people in this room do.
Kind of cool.
Yeah.
Kind of cool. And the numbers of people who've told us, oh, I went to RBG, then I went with somebody, or then we watched it at home with people. I mean, it feels, and certainly people coming to the theaters, the fact that we had, you know, pretty robust theatrical release for a documentary, $14 million, and that's for a documentary quite a bit. There were 4 documentaries last year that made over $10 million, not just ours. And if you look at them, I think they were all stories of, you know, some inspiration, pretty much. You know, Free Solo, Won't You Be My Neighbor, RBG,
Three Identical Strangers.
Three Identical Strangers, a little bit less, more of just an amazing, like, oh my God kind of story, but still something that you would want to go and spend the money and spend the 90 minutes in a theater to go see this. You know, it's entertaining, it's informative, it's inspiring.
Absolutely. And what do you say to people who are saying this is the start of a golden age of documentaries?
Well, I think in some ways it is, but it's still very hard to make documentaries. It's still really difficult to get the funding, to be able to do it. The technology has made it easier in some ways for filmmakers to do it on their own, or to do a lot of it on their own, but it's still really difficult. And only, I think it's like less than 2% of the films that apply to Sundance, documentaries that apply to Sundance, get into Sundance. I mean, Sundance is a huge launching pad for a lot of documentaries. And that's fantastic, but it's okay, that's the 2%. What about the 98%? There are other, of course, there's a big, robust festival circuit that people do. But, you know, documentarians, you know, you don't do it to make a ton of money. You know, you do it because you just can't help yourself, that you love to tell these stories. And
well, you had a great anecdote because you ran into the creators of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez documentary, and what were they saying to you about?
The Alexandria, it's called Knock Down the House, which is now streaming on Netflix. Netflix paid $10 million for that documentary, which was the highest amount paid for a documentary ever, and it had a very brief release in theaters, and then went right to Netflix. But I'm forgetting what it is.
I think you ran into them.
Yeah, I saw them at a screening of Knock Down the House. They did a theatrical screening.
And they basically thanked you for paving
the way.
they
did, yes. They said, because I went up to them afterward, they were talking, and I said, hi, I'm Betsy West. They went, oh, thank you so much. Because, you know, the year that we released RBG at Sundance, you know, that year did so well, and RBG was the first of the films that came out and did so well in the box office that it drove up the price. So I can tell you that our distributors did not pay $10 million for RBG, so that's why they were thanking us. Yeah.
Blazing the trail once again for others.
Yeah.
Well, it also, we saw in 2018 just a slew of documentaries, including Lifetime's documentary series about R. Kelly.
Yeah, amazing.
Amazing, and it's widely credited with reigniting public interest, right, in in the situation around R. Kelly and leading to the formal charges being brought against him. I think it's up to 21 counts now.
Yeah.
Of criminal sexual abuse,
That story had been
assault,
floating around, and journalists he'd been confronted a little bit, but when that documentary really did.
Yeah, I have a data point that during the series, the run of the series, the National Sexual Assault Hotline had a 27% increase in calls.
Wow. Wow.
Talk about inspiring action right there.
Yeah.
So why do you think they are catalysts for discussion and action?
Yeah, I mean, there's another one I like to mention, the Kirby Dick documentary about sexual assault in the military, and the name of which is now escaping me. But when that film came out, Leon Panetta was then the defense secretary. He saw the film, and the basic premise of it was that the chain of command, having to report sexual assault up the chain of command, was self-defeating because frequently the aggressor was your boss. So he, launched an investigation, and that changed how the military was handling sexual assault. I mean, these documentaries have, by being so, if they're well done, and if they're powerful, and if they make their case, and if they are journalistically factual, that they don't feel like, oh, they're not looking at all the sides, that they really have considered this, they can have a tremendous power and impact.
Well, that brings up the question, what are the essential distinctions between sort of pure works of journalism, documentary? Are the lines blurring?
Well, the lines are very blurred. Not all documentaries are works of journalism, I don't think. The documentaries that I make are, but there aren't any rules out there, I mean, I guess I just feel that, you have to be fair, you have to give the other side an opportunity to speak their mind, you have to and you don't want the audience to feel 5 minutes into the film like, oh, okay, I get it, that's the side they're on, that there's a kind of predictability to some more advocacy films that I find off-putting a little bit. Like, I want to feel like somebody's really telling me the truth, and that they have been skeptical about the side that they might necessarily be sympathetic to, but they really worked on that. Sometimes I don't feel that completely when I watch some films, but there's an awful lot of really strong work out there that is very journalistic and really powerful in a longer format.
And we're seeing some of that in some of these documentaries. We talked about R. Kelly. On Netflix, there's a dramatic series about the Central Park 5 case, but we should also remember that in 2012, Ken Burns did his own documentary about
Sarah, actually.
Oh, yes.
He was the EP, but Sarah Burns'
daughter.
His daughter did the documentary.
Exactly, and very powerful.
Yeah.
And I did want to also bring back, this was a topic of conversation back at the office. We were talking about the documentary, The Witness. Has anybody seen this? Produced by William Genovese, about the Kinney Genovese murder.
His sister.
Yes.
His sister.
Yeah, so for those who don't remember or weren't around at this time, Kinney Genovese was a 28-year-old bar manager who was heading home after a late shift, was attacked, stabbed multiple times, killed in a train station, right in Kew Gardens, I think, was where it was. And this tragedy then gets catapulted into infamy by a New York Times report that appears 2 weeks later. And it claims that there were 37, then later 38 eyewitnesses who heard her piercing screams for help and did nothing. Okay, and this introduces the term bystander effect, right, into our lexicon. The problem was, it never happened. Okay, the police reports, there were extrapolations of the police reports, and basically they created this grossly exaggerated, report. Unfortunately, okay, And this documentary helped to bring this to light. I mean, there, again, had been lots of discussions about it all along the years, but this finally created this opportunity to revisit it. And the story, the 1964 story, was appended in 2016 with this note.
Yeah, that was pretty incredible.
Yeah, and you also have a documentary that's out now, just came out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the executive producer, not the director, of a documentary that's called The Lavender Scare. And it's about a chapter in American history that a lot of people don't really know about. And it's directed by Josh Howard, who was my colleague at 60 Minutes. And he called me one day and he told me about the book he had just read called The Lavender Scare, about the witch hunt of homosexuals in the 1950s that continued for decades. He's telling me all about this and on and on and on. And he's a great producer. And I just said, Josh, you got to make a documentary about this. You have to do it. So
we've got a trailer here. Can we take a
take a
peek?
look.
Yeah,
It's playing at Cinema Village right now, so you could see it. Yeah.
We have your friend in the next room. She's already told us that you're gay. You give us the names of others and we'll go easier on you.
Committee will please come to order.
Homosexuals must not be handling top secret material. The pervert is easy prey to the blackmailer.
It started this Lavender Scare. It started this systematic campaign to identify and remove all suspected gay men and lesbians from the Federal Civil Service.
I was called to the FBI office.
They wouldn't allow legal representation.
I was a scared kid.
They wouldn't reveal the evidence.
They said, we have information, you are homosexual. Do you have any comment?
And they would threaten exposure.
I submitted my resignation.
I lost my job at the patent office.
That was the end of it. I was out. I was the first person to fight back out of all of those huge number of people that were fired in the 50s.
And in 1965, he led a protest outside the White House, which was both an act of conscience, but also an act of extraordinary courage. We are proud of you, Frank, and we are grateful to you for your leadership.
I mean, it's a heartache that you have the rest of your days.
All of this needs to be said. People need to know.
Powerful. Yeah.
Did you guys, how many knew about the Lavender Scare? Nobody? Yeah. I know, it's kind of unbelievable. As Josh explains, you know, the communists, the Red Scare, people fought back against it, and it was very public. But the Lavender Scare was very quiet and private. And, you know, they would investigate you, call you into an office, say, I'm really sorry, you're fired. And people were so ashamed about the whole thing. It was so quiet that they wouldn't say anything. So that's part of why this is a hidden history. And I just love that, you know, documentaries can go back and take a look and put the pieces together of something that, you know, we should really know about. And to me, it really informs a lot of attitudes about don't ask, don't tell, and, you know, other attitudes toward homosexuals. I mean, I really think he did a great job with it. So Cinema Village, and then it's going to be on PBS a week from yesterday. I think it's next Tuesday. It's on.
Good timing.
You can look up on the Lavender Scare.
Super.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just showing us that documentaries are now a mainstream experience, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And we have another data point I wanted to flash up there. So we did ask, instead of watching or reading news reports, what would you rather do? 42% would rather watch a documentary about current events. 27% apparently want to be sedated.
Yes, I understand.
And fitness is apparently on the top.
That is so.
We love love this. And so we were speaking earlier about documentaries being mainstream now. And has anybody seen this? Netflix has a parody called Documentary Now.
I know.
Oh,
So
check
funny.
it out. Hysterical.
It's so funny.
Bill Hader and Fred Armisen do send-ups of all of the, high-profile documentaries.
All the documentary tropes, all of the kind of, it's very funny.
Yeah, I think the first season they do a send-up of Grey Gardens.
Yeah.
And then one of my favorites is the next one I want to show you. They do a send-up of Nanook of the North.
Yeah.
Called Canuck.
Canuck. Okay. They did, I like the one in the Vice one, where they keep sending this pair of hapless journalists down to interview the cartels, the drug cartels, and they keep getting killed, and then they just send another pair. It's just like,
check it out. It's
very
clearly
funny.
something to watch here. And I just want to point out, Nanook of the North is widely accepted to be the first documentary.
Yeah.
1922, 100 years. And guess what? It was sponsored.
Yes.
By a fur company.
Yeah. I know, that's amazing.
Right.
I knew that, but
That
that
was
is
fun.
really interesting. Yeah.
Another fun fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg's father was a furrier.
Yes. It's all coming together. It's all.
But it does call to mind there are other genres that are documentaries. Just wanted to showcase that the outdoor adventure genre is very popular because we also have Patagonia.
Yeah.
It has its own channel of mini documentaries. And so I just wanted to kind of talk about what the opportunities are for brands getting together with documentary filmmakers.
Yeah, I think they're huge. I mean, filmmakers need resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, a number of filmmakers live in two worlds, and they do more branded content.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, they're working on longer form documentaries just to keep them, to keep the money flow coming in. But also I'm aware of the fact that more and more brands are sponsoring full documentaries that align with their mission in some way, which I think is great, so long as there aren't strings attached to it. That's obviously what the filmmaker would be concerned about. But I think people are seeing the power of stories. And, in a world where we're just lost in our phones all the time and, you can barely look past the headlines and then some other thing comes flying at you, the idea that people go to these long-form stories to find something that they need, to recharge themselves, that has to be attractive, I would think, to companies who might want to be associated with that.
Super. Well, I wanted to just turn it over for final questions. Oh, we've got one here.
Yeah, not so much a question, but just I wanted to share with folks, have people heard of Canopy?
Yeah.
Okay, because Canopy is an app, and it's related if you have a New York library card or a Brooklyn library card, you can stream up to a certain number of movies per month. And there's a rich reservoir of documentaries out there, so it's popular with doc fans.
It is popular.
Any others? Well, we've got one here. Anne.
Hi there. Apropos of our discussion earlier, Ruth Bader Ginsburg obviously is really excellent at creating discourse across difference. And it's amazing your stories of screening the documentary and having people who may have different opinions, whether they're a single issue voter or whether, human beings, they are coming from different lenses, perspectives. Do you have any, and the title of this is Can Nonfiction Narratives Save Public Discourse? That's a lofty title, Mary.
Yeah,
I like it.
I'll say.
But do you have any thoughts about, either what you observed with Ruth and her ability to reach across the aisle, like quite literally, or how the documentaries like this one help to foster discourse where maybe discourse is not happening now?
Yeah, it's a totally critical issue now for our democracy because it does feel like we're just not talking to each other. People they watch Fox or they watch MSNBC and never the twain shall meet. And, that's a disturbing trend, the polarization of the country. I don't want to make films that speak to the choir. I want to make films that somehow touch a deeper place rather than your preconceived notions about what things are. Obviously, RBG appealed to a lot of people who are progressive, have progressive views, and who believe in her view of the law. But I think, the bigger lesson from her in terms of how she affected change in her own life is that she took a very strategic approach to making change. And, she's not a radical, bomb thrower. She certainly considers herself a feminist, and she supported the women's movement, and I think, she sees a place for that kind of activism, but she also sees a place within our judicial system for just tremendous smarts and like playing the long game. I did a Q&A in Boston with a retired federal judge who had been a women's rights advocate in the 1970s, and she said, in the 70s, a lot of us thought that, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, then running the Women's Rights Project for the ACLU, wasn't radical enough, that she wasn't pushing hard enough on more things, that she was too kind of step by step, and she would reject certain cases because she thought they didn't have a chance of winning. She said, we were critical of her. In retrospect, we were wrong and she was right. She wanted change that she hoped would last, and I do think that if you look at the attitudes about gender equality, if you were to do your polls in 1970, should men and women be treated equally under the law, and now, even with some exceptions on the far right, you're just not going to get people who say, oh no, women shouldn't be treated equally. Everybody it's not a radical idea now. It was a radical idea when Ruth Bader Ginsburg took it on. So I think that's why she can maintain a certain level of optimism about where we're going in the future, because she understands what things were like before. So.
Super. On that note, we will wrap it up here. Thank you so much, Betsy.
Thank you. That was fun.